Zoom spiel about just the protocol of where we are online. The hearing is being recorded. We've got the audio recorder in the room as well as the Zoom proceedings being recorded. We've got the owl here, and as you talk, the camera will track to you. And let's get going. So, board members present tonight: myself, William Hanley, chair. We've got Dave Ashmore, Tracy Loftus Keller, and then online we've got Christy Anastasia. Christy, are you with us? There's Christy, and we've got Meredith Randolph. Hi, Meredith.
Hello.
Welcome aboard. And I'm going to put Christy on the spot to give her Zoom spiel.
She's just logging on, sorry.
Okay.
Oh, she's gonna come over and do it from mine.
Hello, welcome everyone. Are we on? We're on. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. Hello, welcome to the Mount Desert Planning Board meeting. If you haven't Zoomed yet, you're in for a treat. This is a hybrid meeting, so there are folks in the room and there are folks online. And for those folks who are online, if you can be cognizant of muting yourself if you're not speaking, it's very easy to pick up background noise and maybe conversations we don't need to be privy to. Also, if you're online, if you can find the chat and enter your name, we'll have your name as a record as a participant in this meeting. And also this meeting will be recorded. We record all the hybrid meetings for note taking. And then for those who are online, if you have something to bring forward for the group, please bring it forward and be recognized by the chair. Let's not use the chat for side conversations. Just bring everything into the room so everybody else can benefit from whatever you have to share. Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. And to Christy or Meredith, or I should say Christy, since she's the Zoom moderator, if we get into it and someone's online and the chair just isn't noticing it, since we've got so many people online as well as in person, just let me know. Thanks. All right, so tonight we've got quarrying license application. We've got quarrying license permit 11/2014, owner Hara McQuinn Incorporated, operator is Freshwater Stone and Brick, agent is Steve Salisbury from Herrick & Salisbury, legal rep is Ed Bearer from Redmond Winchell. Location is off the Crane Road, Hall Quarry, tax map 7, lot 75, zone is residential 1. And the purpose is to review a quarry license application. And Kim, was this one advertised and abutters notified?
Yes, it was advertised in the October 7th edition of the Islander, and abutters notices were sent out on September 30th.
Okay, and also I didn't make an introduction to, we've got Town Council James Collier here with us tonight. Code Enforcement, Kim Keene, and our fantastic recording secretary, Heidi Smallage. And James, anything you want to kick off with first?
It's good to see Captain B's here. Other than that, that's about it.
All right, well, thank you. And why don't we start with just introductory statements? Ed, turn it over to you then.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume I probably don't need to stand. We're in a pretty small space here.
I think we can see you. Just throw that voice out.
Speak clearly, though.
Yeah.
Speak clearly through this mask.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for arranging this meeting again. As you know, it's our position that you have been through all of the review criteria. You have made positive findings on all of the review criteria as of September 30th, 2020. And from that time forward, we've only been able to meet for the second time since September 2020 to have what I understand is this board wrap things up. In the intervening months, it became apparent that we had a easement that was only 30 feet wide, granted to us in 1981 to meet to go from the Crane Road to the quarry site. I've used it all those years, but was advised by the code officer that that was not a sufficient width, and we needed to correct that situation. We did that, we got a 50-foot wide easement, and then there were questions about the sufficiency of that easement when we met in May. We have gone back and we have gotten new easements, as you've seen, and as I have submitted, and much to my chagrin, as Attorney Pelleggi pointed out in his writing, we had mistakenly included the same description in both of the easements so that we didn't quite reach our own site. So I fixed that today, and I'm gonna hand you to give to, I don't know how we get them to your other board members, but there's the revised easement from Colin Moore's to McQuinn, covering the last portion here, getting onto the property. So
you copies of that to distribute, or?
I've got more than enough copies there, more than enough to the board, so they can do what they want with the extra one.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, excuse me, is that, are you saying from the right of way on to the other right of way going to the Mazzetti's other lot, or? I shouldn't see what you're pointing at.
I'll show you if I can
Yeah.
approach, Mr.
Yeah.
Chairman.
Yes.
So we have the easement from Mazzetti that goes
Right.
from Crane Road up to this spot.
Right,
He sold off this
Yeah.
property here to
Yeah.
Mr. Moore's,
Thank you.
and Mr. Moore's has granted us this easement portion right here.
right, that's what you're talking about, just that
Yes.
extra piece of corner. So
Yeah.
it wasn't that little tiny little corner. I thought it was that little tiny corner you were talking
It is
about.
that tiny corner that I'm talking about right there. That's what Mr. Moore.
Yeah, that, but
Mis-
not that little piece right there.
No,
Okay.
So James, let's get through the introductory statements and then we can peel the pineapple.
Later.
no, Mr. Chairman, what I'm hopeful for is some direction tonight on how you're planning to proceed. Obviously, we've been at this for years. Candidly, the first time that Tim and I spoke about this particular property was in 2009, so it's been many years. We'd like to get through this process, and I brought copies of your checklist, which I assume perhaps you all have, but copies of your checklist that was created as the town went along, we all went along, showing your positive votes on all of the review criteria, including the road. And it seemed pretty clear there that you recognized that there was not a need to construct a road, that this is an existing quarry. You didn't require anything at that time when you voted by way of road improvements, except that it be paved as is required for both existing and new quarries, that it be paved for the first 200 feet in from Crane Road, which is a condition of your approval on the access conditions there. But it seems to me that this is plowed ground, as are all the other review criteria. I hope that you can recognize that this has been a long process for everyone and that we're at the end of it.
Okay, thank you. Well, historically, Dan, we then go to you with any opening statement.
Thank you. Daniel Pelleggi. I represent several of the butters, Jan Coates, Jerry and Lori Shankovitz, and Peter and Judy Aylen. Thanks for the opportunity to speak briefly. I hope you'll listen to me later when we get into specific issues. I'd like to, as an opening matter, I just want to point out to the board that this board closed the hearing in this matter to new evidence a long, long time ago, after which the applicant has continued even up till tonight to submit new evidence. We had a board policy in terms of the date before a hearing, by which all submissions were going to be filed. New materials been filed by the applicant tonight. Again, our position on behalf of the abutters is that the board shouldn't accept new evidence. If the board's going to listen to new evidence, you should accept evidence from the public that Mr. Manahan has been asking to submit for months now. I'd suggest when you review this application, you will agree with us that the road standards requirements have not been met and need to be met. And I'd ask you again, if we get to it, when you look at all the application as a whole, you'll agree with me as well that several other standards haven't been met, including noise, best practical means, and including buffering and screening. You've been there, you've been to the site, you understand there is no buffer between the quarry area, the active quarry area, and the Jan Coach property. No buffer, no screening at all. It's essentially bare granite. I ask you to deny the application based on all of those things. I'd like to be heard more about the roads when you get there. Thank you for listening.
Manahan?
Yes, thank you. If I could just for a couple of minutes. My name is Matt Manahan. I represent Hans and Julia Hazard-Merck. And they live across Somme Sound from Quarry. And I just want to sort of just reiterate what Dan said, but add a couple reasons we think you should deny the application tonight. Back in September of 2020, I provided you with a letter from Mark Bergeron, who is a professional engineer who formerly worked for the Maine DEP. He was the director of one of the bureaus, Land Resources. He provided his opinion to you that the McQuinn application materials do not meet the requirements of the QLO. And Mr. Bergeron is here again tonight, and he is ready to provide a summary of his conclusions about why the application does not meet the requirements of the QLO. But specifically with respect to noise, you did discuss, Mr. Bear says you did discuss that back in September 2020. But briefly, I just recap, we provided you with a letter from Michael Batarian, who's a noise consultant with over 30 years of experience. And he provided his opinion that the McQuinn application does not meet the noise control requirements of the QLO. Now, I proposed a way for the board to meet the ambiguity in the QLO's noise provisions, to address that ambiguity by requiring McQuinn to meet the DEP's noise requirement, which McQuinn has refused to do. We reiterate our position that the board should require McQuinn to meet the DEP's noise requirements as the only way to protect the surrounding properties and those who own property across Somme Sound, such as my clients. But even more problematic is McQuinn's failure to estimate the noise levels at the property line. In October 2020, I sent you a letter pointing out that McQuinn has not complied with section 6.1J of the QLO, which requires the application to include estimated levels of noise at the property line. And McQuinn still has not complied with that QLO requirement. So for that reason alone, you should deny the application. And then there's the Crane Road issue, which we just heard Mr. Barrett talk about. I sent you a lengthy email on Monday of this week responding to Mr. Bear's last minute attempt to refute our points about the Crane Road issue. I won't repeat that for you right now, although I'd be happy to if you would like to hear more of a discussion about that. But suffice to say that Mr. Bear is seeking to add more information to the record, which he has claimed repeatedly is closed. The hearing is closed. And frankly, it's the height of hypocrisy to say that the record is closed for us, which I've just talked about, what we tried to submit and talk about, and yet it's not closed for the applicant. That violates our due process rights, and it's just not proper procedure. So we would request to be heard on these issues or to have Mr. Bear's new evidence excluded from the record. So again, I'd be happy to talk about the other Crane Road issues, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. So thank you.
Mr. Cates.
Yes, Mr. Cates.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm joining you from beautiful downtown Brunswick here tonight. And I thank you for the opportunity to briefly discuss this too. And I want to just piggyback on what both Mr. Pileggi and Mr. Manahan have said. First of all, clearly, just on the issue of whether there is an adequate easement for this quarry, I think even Mr. Bearer tonight admitted that as of today, there wasn't, because there was a missing portion of the road not subject to the easement. He has apparently submitted to you all tonight a second easement, which he says solves the problem. I don't know if it does or it doesn't. I haven't seen it. The other two attorneys are just seeing it. we ought to be given an opportunity to see if we agree that that closes the loop and is in fact an easement from point A to point B that he needs. Beyond that, I hope you will listen to Mr. Manahan, who is really focused on this issue. It seems as though the easement which he has submitted, as supplemented by yet again new evidence tonight, is still inadequate because it essentially gives the grantor of the easement a veto power over anything that's going to happen there. And again, if given the opportunity, Mr. Manahan will go into that a little bit more as well. Going on though, I just wanted to remind you of a couple of things. First, throughout this process, and I can quote chapter and verse in a little bit, you've indicated that this discussion and this application is more than just a simple sum of its parts. You don't say they've met criteria 1 through 16 and therefore they have they're entitled to their permit. You've made it clear, and your counsel has made it clear time and time again, a couple of things. Number one, that there ought to be opportunity for discussion on the application as a whole. And that's for very good reason, because there are things at play here besides just the criteria set out in this Quarry license ordinance. You also have to take and can and should take into account the provisions of your comprehensive plan. And I think that there are parts of that plan which ought to weigh quite heavily on your decision, and which I'd be happy to get into later. And secondly, the impact of some of the policy statements which are contained in your own land use zoning ordinance. So you need, I think you have recognized that you need to take a look at some point, and maybe it's not tonight, look at the application as a whole. Secondly, your counsel has made it clear throughout the many meetings that this application has taken up that any of these decisions you previously made could be revisited. And there are at least a couple which I would encourage you to at least listen to our pitch that you ought to revisit. One of them is the noise standard. And again, I can get into that more later. And one is whether or not they have satisfied the requirements of the site plan ordinance. So I'm not quite sure how you proceed tonight. I agree with Mr. Manahan that his threshold point is that the applicant hasn't submitted an appropriate easement to show they can proceed here, and thus the application is deficient on its face. Beyond that, I just want to make a point I made a couple of times before at previous meetings. This is not the burden of the neighbors or anyone else to show you that this application doesn't come up to snuff. It's the applicant's burden to show all these things. And if they fail to show any of them, then the application must fail. So I hope you won't speed through this. I hope you will listen to additional points, particularly from Mr. Manahan on the easement, but for Mr. Pelleggi and myself on the balance of the application before you vote. And frankly, I don't see how you can vote tonight, even if you accept the new evidence that Mr. Bear just prepared in the easement. I mean, obviously, out of fairness and legal standards of due process, we ought to have a right to digest that and to respond to it. So thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. James. I think I was gonna kick it off tonight by just kind of looking back to the minutes from the last hearing.
Yeah, what you requested at that time.
Yeah, and the motion that the board made at the end of the hearing, and just as much as I love reading aloud, bear with me, and I'm gonna circle back to the board motion from May 3rd, 2021. And at that hearing, at the end of the hearing, the board made a motion, and actually Ms. Eaton moved it, Dave seconded it. And we had 3 requests of the applicant. And the first one was if no waiver is granted, and this is pertaining to the Crane Road issue. How exactly does the applicant intend to meet the standards in the subdivision ordinance? That was the first part of the motion. The second one was the language of the right-of-way easement and a plan showing the precise location of the right-of-way in order to make a comparison of the easement to the plan. The plan should show all of the lands that the easement crosses and who owns those lands. And then the third item of the motion was discussion with regard to the MMA manual, page 72, regarding non-zoning waivers and the standards for granting them, including case law on what those standards are, with the intent of having the next meeting as soon as can be scheduled. So here we are. And I would say that and correct me if I'm mistaken, James, but the Crane Road is still a front burner issue here.
Sure. I think I'd like to clear up now the third one if we can. I don't know if it was in Mr. Manahan's letter or Mr. Bear's, but one of them made reference to, maybe it was Mr. Bear's originally, to York versus Town of Agunquit. Is that you, Ed, or was that Mr. Manahan?
That was me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in that case, they have a pretty clear distinction between different types of waiver, and waiver on dimensional standards, waiver on zoning matters, and waivers on other matters. And they go in, it's really interesting in there to talk about, in that case, subdivision standards, and it mentions 4 or 5 of them, and then width of road is one, and the court says, but the width of the road is also in the land use ordinance, therefore it becomes a zoning standard. And then they say, because it's a zoning standard from the land use ordinance, you have to go through the general, then it becomes like a variance. Other matters you can do otherwise. And so in your ordinance, it says that you can waive stuff. I forget what it is, I had it here somewhere. 4.2 and 4.3, submission requirements and then waiver of performance standards where there's unnecessary hardship will result from strict compliance with the performance standards or where there are extraordinary circumstances of a particular plan. So in my mind anyways, I'm confident, having read the case that Mr. Manahan provided, having reread a bunch of MMA stuff, reread your ordinance, that in theory, it's something you could waive. It's not something that needs the standard of a variance that goes to the Board of Appeals. I think it's a judgment call by the planning board using that criteria in 4.3.
Mr. Collier, if it's in.
No, wait.
It's in the zoning ordinance. Ed,
Hold on a second.
Thank you.
So, where I wanted to go next was, Kim, we've had a number of these before the board recently. I mean, we've got, these aged roads serving properties that just obviously aren't meeting the standards. And the board, and just wanted to hear from you kind of what you see as the issue here with this, and kind of relative to especially the performance standards of 5.1.4 that we commonly get into, where we've got an older road, there's a right-of-way width issue, maybe there's a travel width issue, maybe there's a clearance issue, and often we'll get Chief Bender to chime in too and say, that obviously access for emergency town services is critical, and he'll talk about, what kind of requirements we have for that. And a lot of times what we're finding as the board is reviewing these is it's relative, obviously, to each case by case, and each one's a little different, but there's often not been a blanket waiver applied by a broad waiver applied for each case review by the board, and if I recall correctly, the last one we reviewed was over on Buttonwood Lane, over on Soames Pond. And just putting this in perspective for the record, that we had an older road going back, serving more than 2 lots. There was not necessarily a issue with the road width, but there was an issue with the right-of-way, where the neighbors didn't want to have the widened right-of-way on the property, so they just weren't able to achieve that. There was a beautiful alley of mature hardwood trees going down the road that, the board determined was, a critical component of, kind of the road character and character of the town. And if we were to meet all the standards of criteria, that, the trees would have to come down. So what the board found in that case was, hey, look, let's get Chief Bender's input in here. He chimed in, he talked about, hey, look, we need the 14.5-foot cube to fit the trucks through back there. You've got turnaround space at the back of the driveway. We can get in and out, but the conditional approval was really about, hey, look, you have to maintain access along the drive for emergency vehicles back in there. Granted, a right-of-way extension wasn't possible because of the neighbors. So, we worked it out. We found a solution to that particular case. And when it translates to kind of what we have here now, and if I'm interpreting what's been submitted to the board by Mr. Bearer, we had a previously substandard right-of-way width. We've now got a proposed 50-foot right-of-way. We've got easement language that was found to be, it was provided, found to be inadequate. We just had it resubmitted tonight. None of us have seen that yet. However, one of the big questions, and maybe this is maybe going back to James, is we've got a 50-foot right-of-way. We've got, working towards compliance, but when I look back to what we really asked for, I'm not seeing all of the layers of the cake here to make this compliant. And, in the case I just exampled, there were kind of hard lines in the sand that were forcing a compromise to getting that road approved. Here, we've got a 50-foot right-of-way. You've got the travel width obviously needs to be improved. There's a lot of things here that can happen, but other than just the 50-foot right-of-way, it's kind of scratching my head as to why we don't have further information or former demonstration of compliance here. And what do you think, James?
Well, I saw that you mentioned the 3 issues, the waiver, the discussion around the waiver, the plan that was requested, and the technicalities of the right-of-way.
Yeah.
And there was this fixing the problems with the right-of-way standards. So I attempted to go to number 3 and talk about the waiver first. If you want to talk about all 3 at once, because I know Mr. Bear and the other attorneys and then will want to get in on those things. But it's my feeling that Mr. Bear didn't have a road that was the right road. The code enforcement officer discovered this after, we've been doing this for a decade, that the lot was non-conforming. It was an illegal lot. That there had been quarrying going on there for God knows how long. Nobody seems to know how long. There wasn't any frontage, and there had to be frontage. After that, there wasn't a proper road to go in there. This is a problem throughout the town, in Southwest Valley Cove and other parts of the town. I could name things, Kim and I discuss them all the time. When you don't have enough width of road to get to your lot, you just can't develop it. And if you let this go through, other people all over the town would want to get in on narrow roads and start developing stuff. The road has to come up to snuff. At the last meeting, yeah, I thought you were very plain spoken. You told Mr. Barrow what you wanted to see. I've been, I think, and Kim, I was doing it, not Kim, generous in our saying, take your time, Ed, get this mess fixed up. I took a lot of criticism for that. Frankly, you just haven't provided the stuff that we asked you to provide. So if it was me, which is not my call, but I'd vote to deny and move on. You were specific in what you wanted to see. The code enforcement officer can help us with this. But we all know that in the subdivision standards for roads, there's certain things that you gotta show. And in the past, I've seen these engineered type plans, or maybe Steve Salisbury could do it, but there's cross sections and they say the road's gonna be this wide. Mr. Bear asked in one of his submissions if you had to be able to show that you could build the road. Well, obviously not, but you gotta show what the road's gonna look like.
We did that.
Well, you didn't do that.
Well, it's right on the plan, the cross section, right on the plan.
I'm gonna defer to the code enforcement officer. In my opinion, it's not good enough.
Well,
So maybe Kim can walk us through that, but I guess, Mr. Chairman, my point is that if the submission is not up to what the board, what the code enforcement officer's help wants, I think it's time to deny for lack of information.
have you heard?
I'd like to hear from Kim as to.
Yeah.
Well, if you pull, 514.1 under the subdivision ordinance, it's pretty specific on what the street design and construction standards are. The 50-foot right-of-way, road width, 16 foot. I don't see that on the plan. I don't see shoulders, I don't see grade. I don't see the cul-de-sac information as far as the outer edge of the road and the inner edge of the road. I'm kind of, the cul-de-sac goes into Harold McQuinn Inc.'s property, so is that the dead end of the road? I mean, are they saying that the road that Musetti's lots and Morris can actually go up into that cul-de-sac? Instead of having the cul-de-sac stop right here at the intersection of the three lots and have the lot line go to the center of the cul-de-sac, to me, that would be where the cul-de-sac should have stopped instead of bringing it in, because there's no dimensions on the cul-de-sac, turning radius, the radii, the material of the road. And I know Mike Bender said there's some trimming of trees and I believe potholes that need to be fixed. But there's no road dimensions on the plan. And like you said, we just got, I guess, the corrected deed for the Moores, McQuinn. I mean, that's what I see.
So in short, you've seen dozens or probably hundreds of these things when somebody's gonna do a subdivision road, and I've seen a lot of them too.
Well, subdivision, yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
and so there's more than what's on that plan. It's more complete. That's all I'm saying. I think it had to be a lot better than that.
But I'll circle back to the first part of our motion again, and I'll then turn it over to Ed. But again, we asked if no waiver is granted, how exactly does the applicant intend to meet the standards of the subdivision ordinance?
Sure. So I honestly thought, Mr. Chairman, that we would show you the 50-foot wide right-of-way, which we've done on this plan in the easements, and that's what's required by the subdivision ordinance. 50 foot wide, right? We can all agree on that. And we showed you the width of the road and the crown and the ditches and the shoulders and things of that nature. So I'm not really, and I don't really understand the cul-de-sac thing. I mean, this is an abomination of a situation here. I mean, we use this road to get to our lot, but then the primary chunk of the road goes off in this direction to serve other lots, and there's no cul-de-sac up there. This is bizarre. That all being said, We asked for a waiver, because the fire chief out there, he said it was adequate, trim some trees. I mean, it was fine by him the way it was. I'm not here living and dying on a waiver, and I tried to make this point, and I don't think that we had much of a discussion about it at the last meeting. We need to look at section 6.2G of the Quarry licensing ordinance, okay? We need to look at that. That says new driveways and access ways have to meet the standards of the subdivision ordinance. This is not new. This has been here since before the 80s. This has been here for decades. It is not new. This board knew that when it approved the road access issue back in, whenever it was, 2018, 2017, whenever we did roads, and required, among other things, that we add the 200 feet of pavement, because that's what another section of section 2.G requires. 6.G, excuse me. So we don't have to meet any road standard. It's an existing road. Can anybody dispute that it's an existing road? No. Can anyone dispute that the language in the ordinance says new? The word is right there, new roads must meet these standards. And when we flip to the earlier section of the QLO dealing with new quarries, it says roads shall, because it's going to be a new road. It's going to a new quarry. In this instance, under existing quarries, which is what we've been under for the last 4 years of review, it doesn't say that we have to bring it up to standards. The town seems to ignore that. It's a big red flashing light. We don't have to do it at all. If we do have to do it, we can build a road within this 50-foot strip. Now, the thing about the cul-de-sac, I don't know what to tell you. That seems silly. If you want us to show it on a plan, go out and try to revise this again just to show it on a plan, we can. But more importantly and more to the point, we don't have to build a new road. The ordinance is clear on that. I don't know why we're having these discussions about waivers, except that I was asked to get something from the fire chief if we wanted to not have to build a road, and we did that. Come to the meeting and we're told, well, you gotta build a road. No, we don't have to build a road. If the ordinance said we had to build a road, then we would build the road, but we don't have to. Can we look at the ordinance and see if we agree on that language or not?
Sure,
Is there any question about it?
Well, James, I want you to chime in here too, but what I was trying to point out, Ed, is that the board has a history of reviewing road situations like this. And yes, they're existing roads, and yes, they're not new roads, and you gotta hold on a second. And so what I was trying to paint the picture is this is coming up all the time, and there's case history here with the board finding decisions on this, and that there's often some common ground we've just got to find with some of these older existing roads that are just physically challenged at times and meeting, travel widths, clearance, cul-de-sac requirements, that kind of things. But what I was trying to say more than anything else is this is something that the board has been voting on frequently, and that I don't understand why you're saying that because the QLO says it only applies to new roads. We've got an existing road, but we've got all the history of the board reviewing these existing roads.
You don't have any history of reviewing the road standard in the QLO except this history, this application. You don't have any history. What you do with subdivisions or other things that involve other ordinances, this ordinance is plain on its face. It does not require that an existing quarry and an existing road be brought up to standard.
But it's just, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
A new road needs to be.
So I get that reference in the quarry ordinance,
It's
but
not just a reference, it's the standard.
But the standard the board has been experiencing is we are reviewing these kind of things that aren't in subdivisions, that are serving more than 2 lots. Like we've got the history of reviewing road types like this and decisions on them previously, so.
Well, I have an
Yeah.
ordinance in front of me, and I'm supposed to meet these standards, and
Yeah.
all the difference in the world, that Attorney Kate saying that you can think about other things, don't limit yourself to the review standard.
Yeah.
If that's the case, and it's just chaos is gonna reign.
Yeah, but, I hear you.
The standard is crystal clear. You will turn to it and read it
Yeah.
aloud.
I-
And tell me that it applies to an existing road.
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bear is just wrong about this.
yeah,
Yeah,
so-
we'll get to him later. I think it goes Bear, then Pelagi, then
Yeah.
Mr. Manahan, then
Yeah.
Gates.
The other thing is too, that like the use of this road is far different though from the other reviews we made and other accommodations we've made in those past board decisions. I mean, in this case, we've got commercial traffic. We've got potentially heavy commercial traffic shared with residential traffic. The other decisions the board has made have been all residential. You know, they've been, you know, the 80-year-old driveway / road serving 3 lots, and we've got to get the fire trucks through it, or we can't get a cul-de-sac. And I'm not trying to repeat myself here, but what I'm trying to paint the picture of is this. I think our ordinance does apply to this beyond the QLO.
Which ordinance applies? Because this is an application under the QLO. So
I-
what other ordinance applies?
So
to a
what,
road?
why wouldn't the land use ordinance and the subdivision road standards apply then to that? I don't.
Well, because it's not a new, listen, okay, if you're not gonna turn to, I will. Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, Okay, let's take a look at the QLO standard. Right.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's a little,
Yeah, so it's,
So, section G, road and driveway design, circulation and traffic. Any new driveway or road shall conform to the standards set forth in the town of Mount Desert Land Use Ordinance. And I'm not sure what standards are on the land use ordinance, just refers to the subdivision ordinance, which is an argument for a waiver as opposed to anything else.
Mhm.
But it says new, it plainly says just new. If you look in the section G in new quarries, it doesn't say new roads, it says driveways and roads. It doesn't have to say new, because that's a new use. This is an existing quarry, and it says simply any new driveway or road. We don't have a new driveway. We don't have a new road. Please, you've got to find that this is a new driveway or a new road to make that applicable.
yeah, so I'm hearing you.
Good.
Can I just point out that it says new driveway or road, not new road.
And
A new driveway or road.
the process we go through, Kim, in reviewing these things is that it kicks us to 6B11 in the land use ordinance. And under 6B11, you know, it says that if more than 2 lots are accessed by the same private road, then it must meet the street design and construction standards of section 5.14 of the subdivision ordinance.
they're attached.
Yeah, so,
And that's the way I
Yeah.
think that Mr. Bear is talking by the chair.
and so when you go to 5.14.1 of the subdivision ordinance, you know, there's, you know, we're talking about standards of you've got the minimum right-of-way width of 15 feet, the road width of 16 feet, the max grade 12%, minimum center line radius of 150 feet, the crown, the angle of street intersection, and all of this stuff. And just, on the plan submitted, yes, you're showing a right-of-way, yes, you're showing a road section detail, but it just does not seem like it's complete enough yet.
It's not, because we don't think that the section 6.2G requires us to build a road. You asked for some information.
Yeah.
I didn't, the detail with which you want that information, if you want Steve Salisbury to generate a plan, we've all been out there, you know what the grade is.
Yes.
We've all been out there. This is, you're making us jump through a hoop that makes absolutely no sense, and it is not required under your ordinance. It is simply not
See,
required.
I hear you, but I differ on that. And James, can you speak to why the other ordinances apply to this?
Well, I think it's in it's in the case that was provided to us from before, in the case with the Superior Court. And it goes through in length about the two things being used in conjunction. In the ordinance itself, in the quarry license ordinance, it says that it's to be, the ordinance shall in no way impair or remove the necessity of compliance with any other rule, regulation, bylaw, permit, or provision of law. It is anticipated that the application will be reviewed concurrently with this ordinance and the requirements of the land use ordinance. Where this ordinance imposes a greater restriction upon the use of land, buildings, or structures than any other rule, regulation, bylaw, permit, or provision of law, the provisions of this ordinance shall apply. So the applicant can't say, which I think is what he's trying to say, hey, all those rules about the fact that we're an illegal lot, that we didn't have frontage originally, that we were an illegal lot with an improper road into it, and the section that applies that the chair read, which applies to all lots in town. We deal with the situation, as I said before, many times, that when you have a lot that is served by a road that's too small, if you want to have an activity on it, the rule in this town is thou shalt expand the road and bring it up to standard. And I think what you're trying to say, Mr. Barry, what you're trying to say is we're just gonna throw that out and not apply it. I understand what you're saying about the other thing, and I tend to agree.
What
the other-
other thing?
About the new roads and all that.
Well, if you understand
But
that,
that
why is there
doesn't-
any further discussion?
Well, that doesn't supersede that section of the land use ordinance.
We've been to court over this very same issue already. And
No,
the judge-
not that.
We did too, James. They took your advice and they ended up in court, and the judge said, no, you don't just go to the land use ordinance because it's got a section on nonconformities unless there's some discrepancy or between the two ordinances. He said, this is foolish. This is an unlicensed existing quarry. I'm looking at the ordinance. He's sending you down the same road again.
I didn't send them down the road
Yeah,
for the first time. They wanted to go down that road and I defended them.
Well, all right, well, it wasn't a while.
I didn't send it.
They went, and the judge is gonna send it right back to you again. If you try to imply or enforce other ordinances or incorporate them into this one when there isn't any need to do so. And in this instance, there's absolutely no need to do so. It's immaterial what you do in other instances regarding development of other lots in town. This is a quarry ordinance subject to this, or quarry license subject to this ordinance and this ordinance alone. And this ordinance does not require that an existing road be brought up to town standards.
I refer respectfully to page 19 of the decision in Harold McQuinn versus the town of Mount Preserve, Harold Shankovitz interviewed. It says, nothing in this decision undermines the concurrent review anticipated by section 2.8 of the QLO. The planning board is still expected to review quarry and license applications concurrently under both the QLO and the LUZO. What do you want us to do? Throw the LUZO, not use it?
It's going to get thrown out. I mean, if you deny this application on the basis of the road standard, well, first of all, I'd say, last thing I want to do is come back to you with another meeting, and we'll come back with all these good plans that you want to see. Because plainly, we can build a road there. You know we can. You really need to see that. You'll see it, and then we're going to challenge whether we have to do it.
Yeah, I guess, just maybe a simple watered down question is, why didn't you do it? I mean, everything you guys have invested in the application, why would you not bring the road up to standard?
Why wouldn't we bring it up to standard?
Why not?
You know how much that's going to cost?
Yeah.
And is it necessary?
With the
Is it necessary?
with the commercial traffic on it? I mean,
It's been used like that for 30 years. Is it necessary for us to bring it up to a different standard? No, it's not. That's why.
yeah,
You're asking us to.
because
do
it's
something.
expensive.
but it's unnecessary,
Yeah.
both unnecessary and expensive.
Mhm.
Whichever one you want first. Unnecessary, it's expensive, and it's not required under your
Mhm.
ordinance.
Okay,
Now-
we're just
Yeah.
repeating the same thing
Yeah,
over and over again.
we are, and Dan's got his hand up here, so
Thank you. I promise I won't yell at you.
thank you.
The applicant, what I'm hearing is the applicant is conflating the standard applying to roads that are being built on the quarry site, as part of the quarrying application, conflating that with the standards that apply to access roads, private roads that serve that property. And those are two different things. So James touched on this, but Quarry License Ordinance Standard 2.8 tells the board to read the Luso concurrently with the Quarry License Ordinance. If we do that, it takes us to Luso's Section 6B11. Section 6B11 in the Land Use Ordinance, which, by the way, this board can't waive, you have to go to the Board of Appeals for a variance if you want a waiver. Section 6B11 says if more than 2 lots are accessed by the same private road, it must meet the street design and construction standards of subdivision ordinance section 5.14. You guys have talked about that. Kim referenced that. I'm going to talk about the specifics. You might remember I stood up in front of you in May and said, nobody's talking about the dimensional standards that all apply. No one's mentioned it at all. And thankfully, we're talking about that today. But I want to give you a little history lesson. In response to a freedom of access request, the town provided correspondence with the applicant beginning in August of 2019 about this issue. It was raised by the code enforcement officer with the applicant's counsel in August 2019. And from August 2019 through 2020, there were regular emails back and forth. And in not one of those emails did the applicant ever contend, like they do today, that the road standards didn't apply. What they said is, we're gonna make it right. We're gonna make it apply. We're gonna do it. And that's why we had a long layoff where nothing happened, because they kept telling the code enforcement officer, it's gonna happen. It didn't happen. Well, 2021 rolls around and everybody decided to tell the public that these conversations between the applicant and the town have been happening out the road standards for a year and a half before any of us heard anything. So then we get to a hearing in 2021 where the board addressed all of this, and you had 3 specific questions and requests of the applicant. By the way, at that hearing, the applicant didn't contend that the road standards didn't apply. You asked them for 3 things. They haven't provided it. The road standards apply. You take it right through. It's very clear through your ordinance construction. 2.8 of the quarrying license ordinance goes directly to 6B11 of your land use ordinance. That references section 5.14 of the subdivision ordinance. Those standards, Kim pointed it out, the board's caught on. They haven't been met. There's been a boatload of time, or a boatload of time since the record's closed and evidence was closed for the applicant to do this, and they haven't. And then all of a sudden, in anticipation of today's meeting, and at today's meeting, we hear that the standards that we've been trying to get compliance with since 2019 suddenly don't apply. I think the board's got it. Mr. Manhan can talk about the specifics, but, you know, I've been saying all along, I said last spring, once we found out about this, there are major deficiencies in the Crane Road. There are major deficiencies. They used to speak English in their earlier life. Major deficiencies in the application materials in terms of the Crane Road's compliance with very clear standards that you hold every other multi-lot private road to. You just have to deny. This has been going on for so long, the record's closed. I urge you, please deny the application. Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Mr. Manahan.
Am I gonna respond individually, or?
Let's
I'm not gonna
cycle through and then you respond.
I'm not gonna take much of your time because what Mr. Pelleggi said is effectively what I was gonna say, but just one quick point for you, which is to clarify that Mr. Bear's assertions about what the ordinance QLO says very clearly, he claims in 6.2G is just wrong, because that provision on new roads, new driveways, only applies to a new road or new driveway for the quarry. It doesn't speak to an existing road that serves more than 2 existing lots. That's what the QLO and subdivision standard talks to. So they're completely different standards. And clearly, as Mr. Collier said, the QLO standard applies here because it's an existing access road that serves more than 2 lots. So Mr. Bear's argument that somehow 6.2G means that the road standards in the subdivision ordinance only apply to new roads is just wrong, because they're separate requirements. So I just want to say that you are on strong legal grounds in rejecting the notion that the subdivision standard doesn't apply.
And so,
Mr. Cates.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Just briefly, I don't have much to add beyond what Matt just said and Dan said. I just would say that given the fact that it's been well over 2 years now that the applicant's been aware of this deficiency, and here at the 11th hour has tried to correct it, and I think we can all agree has failed to correct it, the application I respectfully suggest should be denied tonight, and not just keep this thing open again for them to try to fix something that they've now known about for 2 years. So I hope that there'll be a vote tonight, and as other council have said, I hope the vote is to deny the application because it hasn't met those criteria. Thank you.
and so our focus, when first advised by the CEO that there was a deficiency, was to widen it to 50 feet. Okay, this other talk about meeting standards didn't seem applicable. I'm suggesting to you, and I think quite fairly, that you didn't think it was applicable either, because you approved this road as shown, as it exists right now. You've already approved that. There's the vote on record. You didn't say then, hey, fix this up, make it bigger, make it better. You didn't say that, and I don't think you thought we had to. We didn't think we had to, because we didn't propose it initially. Just because the code officer might take a position doesn't make it the correct position. And I will maintain that we do not need to bring it up to standards. I will maintain, and as we said in our letter to you earlier this month, we can build a road to those standards, and that is a performance standard. You grant approval, you tell us we have to build the road, and if the judge says, yeah, you do have to build the road, then we have to build it to those standards. If you simply want to see a plan that demonstrates that we could build it to those standards, then I'll have Mr. Salisbury draft you a plan. I certainly didn't read or understand your motion from the parking lot meeting in May with the specificity with which it's now raining down on us. That's why we gave you that cross section. Here you go. We can build this road. If you want us to build it, we'll build the road. You got a 50-foot right of way. Here's a cross section for a 50-foot wide right of way. Got the plans, got all that stuff on it. If you want more, just to show you that we can do it, when you all know we can do it, then we'll give you more. But
Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
I'm not sure I understand whether you can build it or not. So help me out with this. It appears that you've got enough width to build it, and you've got rights to build it. But what about the issue that the grantor of the easement has control over what's done there?
well, you can't withhold that authority unreasonably. I think that Mr. Musetti is simply trying to assure himself that we're not going to build it at a time when it interferes when he's using the road for his business for an extended period of time. That isn't anything that he insisted on. His lawyer wanted it in there, so it's there. I don't see that as a game stopper. And if it is, it's our problem. I don't think that you're here to weigh right, title, and interest to that extent. I don't think that's your job. That's my view of it. So if you, and I'm adamant that I don't think that we need to do it at all, but if you want to see a plan that shows you that we can do that, if you want to see the detail that you described tonight, then just tell us, because yes, Mr. Chairman, we've come a long way, we spent an awful lot of money, and we would have no reason to cheap out at this point, and just having Mr. Salisbury draft up those road documents we'd like to see. That's,
But
we didn't, obviously, if we thought you had intended it to be that detailed, then we would have done it.
So can we address the issue of whether they really have the right to do it? I mean, that's, if they have a right, if they really have a right to do it and have the ability to do it, then I don't think we should deny it just because they haven't brought this stuff to us. They can do that, but I question whether they have the right to do it. That's my big question.
Christie or Meredith, you want to chime in here at all? Thoughts, Christie?
Nothing at this time.
James? Meredith, sorry.
Oh, she's still on mute.
You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, I just got a lot of echo when Christie talked.
Nothing, Meredith has nothing to say.
Nothing to say, Meredith. Really? Comments?
Sorry to disappoint.
I guess the question I would have is the minutes from May, that number 3, was that, at what degree of specificity was in the minutes? Because I remember wrapping up that meeting and being really clear about 1, 2, and 3. I don't have the minutes in front of me, but how specific were the marching orders from that meeting, especially on number 3?
Maybe you could read it again, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
so I'll read it again.
Lovely.
Bear with me. So item number 3 from that motion was discussion with regard to the MMA manual, page 72, regarding non-zoning waivers and the standards for granting them, including case law and what those standards are, with the intent of having the next meeting as soon as can be scheduled.
Okay, was it number 2 that said show the precise location?
Number 2, Christie, was the language of the right-of-way easement and a plan showing the precise location of the right-of-way in order to make a comparison of the easement to the plan. The plan should show all of the lands that the easement crosses and who owns the lands. And number 1, which I think there's still a question mark about, is if no waiver is granted, how exactly does the applicant intend to meet the standards in the subdivision ordinance?
Mm-hmm.
And just, I forget who referenced section 2.8 of the QLO.
I did.
You did, and
Yeah, I think it was Dan who referenced 2.8.
yeah, so I want to bear with me again, but just 2.8 talks about the conflict with other ordinances. And what 2.8 reads is that this ordinance shall in no way impair or remove the necessity of compliance with any other rule, regulation, bylaw, permit, or provision of law. It is anticipated that the application will be reviewed concurrently with the ordinance and the requirements of the land use zoning ordinance. Where this ordinance imposes a greater restriction upon the use of the land, buildings, or structures than any other rule, regulation, bylaw, permit, or provision of law, the provision of this ordinance shall prevail. So here we are, James.
Well,
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I have to,
Yeah,
I've listened to you read those twice now.
yeah. I only read that once.
What you,
Yeah.
I'm at the motion, sorry. I didn't hear anything that would suggest that what we gave you doesn't show the precise location of the road. We agree?
So we asked specifically, how does it meet the standards of the subdivision ordinance? And you're telling us that it doesn't have to.
I'm telling you that it doesn't have to. I'm not telling you that we can't. We told you in our letter of earlier this month. If need be, we can build it to meet those standards. If you're simply asking us to show you a plan that shows that, then I'll do that. But it's more important that we build it to those standards. If you tell us we have to, and the judge says they were right to tell you you have to, then we will have to.
So we're not telling you you have to, we just asked the question, how does it meet the standards of the subdivision ordinance?
Well, as is
Yeah.
on the face of the earth, it doesn't.
Mhm.
If we have to meet the standards of the subdivision ordinance, if that's what you conclude, then we will.
So we looked to, so I read, I'm no attorney, but I looked at 2.8. I understand that that enables the threading in of the land use zoning ordinance. We've got case history before the planning board of reviewing things like this and, working towards finding a resolution for it. And you came back and said, hey, we're not doing it.
When you said we're not
Yeah.
doing it, I said that I think the ordinance does not require that we do it.
Yeah.
If I am wrong about that, then we will have to build the road. And we can build the road to the subdivision standard, because that's what the ordinance would require of us. We've never said that we wouldn't do that. We can do that. But I'm not gonna voluntarily agree that we have to do that. If you make that a condition of our approval, we'll see. We'll have to do it unless somebody says we don't. That's our position. We'll build the road if it turns out that we have to build the road, but our argument primarily is that we don't have to.
So I think based again on what we asked for at the last hearing, you gave us a plan and you gave us easement language. The easement language, there was deficient. You made a submission tonight, per the submission guidelines. I don't think we're in any position to even consider that submission tonight. I still don't feel that item 1 is being addressed by the applicant. And really, number 3 on the motion, James, about this whole MMA manual regarding non-zoning waivers, I don't even know if we've even touched upon
We did
that.
originally, and Mr. Manahan has provided the case that I talked about, which is York versus the town of Concord. He then wanted to get into arguing about it, but in essence, I think that we only get to that if we start talking about Ed requesting waivers. And, Mr. Barrett can request, the applicant, I should say, can request 2 types of waivers under section 4.2. He can say, I want a waiver of certain submission requirements. That type of request has to be in writing and specific, which he did not do. Or he can request a waiver of performance standards, a waiver of how the road's built, in essence, which I think he has done.
I did that.
And I think he did it at the last meeting too, verbally.
I did it in writing, and I submitted
In
a letter
writing,
to the fire chief.
So then you have to say, what kind of a waiver is that? And in essence, there's 2 types of waivers, according to the case provided by Mr. Manahan. There's zoning waivers and non-zoning waivers. The zoning waivers go to the Board of Appeals. Non-zoning waivers, you can decide on. It's my opinion that this is a non-zoning waiver and you can decide on it. Then you just look to the standards in the waiver. Unnecessary hardship or strict compliance, so on. But I don't think you have to go there till you make your decisions on the other matters first. I think step number 1 is to say, does LUSO section 6B11 apply? That's the one that says, if you got more than two lots on a road, you have to bring it up to subdivision standards. So I think that's your first question. Does that apply? If it does, question number 2 is, has the applicant shown through what they've submitted, we asked them to do it, that they're gonna comply with it? Then you get into waivers after those two questions are done. Because the answer to number 2 is whether they've shown it. His response might be, no, I haven't, but I want a waiver in what I submit. Or, no, I can't meet it, but I want a waiver to do this part of it performance-wise. So you only get the waivers once you say, does Luso section 6B11 apply? Mr. Bear has argued pretty strongly, hey, it doesn't apply. So the question for the board, I think the board can either go through this analysis, make the decision about whether Luso section 6B11 applies, ask whether the applicant has met those standards or not with their submissions to date, and then decide whether you want to grant them more grace, because if it does apply, to come back at another meeting with a plan and so on. Or if you want to cut them off now, send this off to the Board of Appeals and the court. I mean, the court will certainly tell us whether 6B11 applies. Maybe the Board of Appeals will.
Why can't we figure that out sitting here? Why can't we figure out if 6B11 applies or not?
I think it does.
I think it does too. And, you know, we've reviewed a number of these. We're under those standards and kicking it to another ordinance, the subdivision ordinance.
So my problem with it not applying is this. Then Mr. Bear and the applicant or anybody else who comes in with any application at all and says, I want to do whatever. And Kim says, well, geez, first of all, do you own the lot? Yes. Okay, is it a legal lot? No. Then they find some other way of getting around it. And then you have a bunch of activities on lots throughout the town with inadequate roads. The policy and the principle and the way we've done this in Mount Desert, or at least over the last 20 years I've been dealing with the town, is you gotta bring the road up to snuff. And the way he wants to read it means that they would escape doing that. And I just, that doesn't follow with what we do in Mount Desert. And I'm frankly terrified, because the next person who calls Kim and says, I want to do X, and you let McQuinn Quarry do it, now I want to develop this piece of land in God knows where with 50 lots out the back and beyond because of some complicated reason. I don't like it.
It's not the least bit complicated. Your ordinance, the QLO ordinance that we're dealing with says there's a
If Mr. Bear can speak freely, could I speak too, Mr. Chairman?
we are the applicant.
Yeah, just hold on a second. Yes.
You're arguing with Mr. Collier, so, I mean, I would like to respond to Mr. Collier as well.
Ed, finish what you were saying, please.
This isn't a big can of worms. This isn't a complicated thing. Our position is simply at bottom that the ordinance says any new driveway or road shall be open. Nobody's disagreed that this is not a new driveway, not a new road. So if I'm wrong about that, then we've got to build a road. That's simple. But I don't have a problem with that scenario. We don't. I think you can afford me the opportunity to at least argue that we don't have to build this road and still impose upon me the obligation to do it if I'm wrong. That's not complicated.
Mr. Manahan?
Yeah, thank you. Just briefly, first, putting aside all the other reasons we discussed, no one's mentioned Article 11 of the QLO, which says, quoting, where there's a conflict between the language contained in this ordinance and any other town ordinances, the stricter language shall apply. So that's saying, putting aside the other points which we've made earlier, clearly this standard does apply. And I do want to point out, with respect to the question that was raised about whether this easement is sufficient, that Mr. Bear is wrong that the reasonableness provision can just be overlooked. It says that Mr. Musetti can essentially decline to allow anything to happen on the road if he's making that decision within his reasonable discretion. And I think you're exactly right, that does not allow McQuinn to do what he wants to do, to do what he has to do to comply with the ordinance at the discretion of the landowner. So that's not sufficient title right or interest. And I think that is a fundamental basis of all applications that come before you. The applicant has to have, and I'm quoting from Mr. Bearer's letter, he quotes case law that says, an applicant for a license or permit to use property in certain ways must have the kind of relationship to the site that gives him a legally cognizable expectation of having the power to use that site in the ways that will be authorized by the permit or license he seeks. So if you authorize or require McQuinn to build the road to standards, which he admits that he hasn't provided you information that shows that he can or will, he may not have the ability to do that because his only title right or interest that he's presented allows the landowner to refuse that. So I just think that that's an important point to emphasize. Thank you.
And I think it's an unknown. I understand what Ed's saying and what he thinks the purpose was, but it says in writing that another person has control over what's going to be done on that right of way, and I think that's a serious deficiency. Much more, I mean, they can fix what we're talking about. They can, if Mr. Musetti lets them. But I mean, that's the issue. I mean, Ed's saying that they'll do it, not a problem. I don't think he has the full ability to make that statement because somebody else can interfere with it.
Do you think 6B11 applies?
Yes.
Meredith, do you think 6B11 applies?
Yes.
Christie,
Yes, I do.
Tracy,
Yes, I think it applies everywhere.
James?
I don't get a vote, but definitely,
No, we're not asking for a vote.
as a matter of law, yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
Do you think 6B11 applies, Kim? Anybody want to make a motion to the effect of the board finds that 6B11 applies to this?
Meredith Randolph, I make a motion that 6B11 applies.
Anastasia, second.
All those in favor, Meredith,
Aye.
Christie,
Anastasia, aye.
Dave,
Aye.
Tracy,
Tracy Keller, aye.
myself, William Hanley, aye. So 6B11 applies, James.
So the next question is, I think, has the applicant shown how they will meet the standards of that section? Now, then you have a choice. If you say yes, fine, great, approve it. If you say no, then the answer is, what do we do about that? So you can say, let's come back for another meeting, and Mr. Bear will provide us with a plan, and Mr. Salisbury will draw up, and then we'll meet all the technical specifications that the code enforcement officer usually receives.
And at that, if that were to happen, and there was some issue with a compliance or performance standard of 6B11, which kicks into 5.14, then any kind of, and I hate the term waiver because I don't think that's necessarily what we've been granting in the past, but any kind of board accommodation to a condition that just can't be met would be considered, but specifically, and that's how we've been historically handling that.
And there's two types of waivers, I reiterate. There's submission waivers. I don't want to submit that because of X, which are specific written request. I don't want to provide that because X, Y, Z. Or there's a waiver that I think you're talking about of a performance standard. Here I want to make the road itself a little narrower because there's a nice copse of trees or something. So there's two types of waivers to get into. But I think you do those steps like that, one after another, before you get to waiver.
Mhm.
And as far as, I don't know if you want to talk about this thing Mr. Ashmore brought up, and Mr. Manahan seems to want to talk about it, but the ordinance itself is challenging, or I shouldn't say the ordinance, the easement is challenging. And that's a very sophisticated question. There's several cases in the case law about it. And it's touchy, but basically it comes down on the side of what Mr. Bear is saying. You know, people, you don't look at the right title and interest of that specifically and start judging the easement. Because I have a hard enough time doing it, or other land, real estate attorneys, let alone the board doing it. So it puts the board in a very awkward position. And I don't know what to do there, frankly. I thought about a condition or something. I think, frankly, that's ridiculous. That although technically speaking, I have to agree with Mr. Bear, it's not the board's job to look at the nature of the specifics of the easement. Therefore, I have to disagree with Mr. Manahan. On the other hand, practically speaking, it's absurd that Mr. Ashmore says that the code enforcement officer is gonna say, you gotta fix X, Y, or Z. And Mr. Bear is gonna say, I'd love to, but I gotta go see Mr. Musetti. I mean, that's gonna be very challenging. So
Is that really the board's purview, though?
It's code enforcement officer's
Yeah.
purview for sure. If she thinks Mr. Bear is gonna give us a plan, allegedly, if we let him do this, Mr. Salisbury is gonna create a plan, he's gonna say the road's gonna be this wide, the ditches are gonna be this deep, whatever else, the grade's gonna be like this.
The cul-de-sacs here, or the trucks turning around?
Yeah,
there,
there's gonna be a culvert here, and there's gonna be an overhanging tree, it's all gonna be laid out. And then if something's wrong, and, you know, turns out all the water's running down this way, or this or that isn't working, and something has to be changed, Kim's gonna call Ed, and she's gonna say, something needs to be changed. And then they're gonna have to run off to Mr. Musetti every time they do work on the road. I mean, that's challenging.
So question 2 is essentially, since we just found that 6B11 does apply, is if the submittal has addressed the requirements of 6B11.
Yeah, and I guess I don't think he has, but that's up to you guys. If you say he hasn't, are you gonna give him another chance, or are you gonna just deny the application? I think
Well,
those are
we're
your
just
choices.
kind of drilling down through it at this
Yeah.
point.
Mr. Chairman, on behalf of the applicant, recognizing that you've made your decision, that it applies.
Mhm.
We didn't take the extent to which you wanted information about the road to the extent that we should have. That's clear, I guess. I mean, you can see that we heard you because we did give you that cross-section. We thought that that was satisfactory to show that it could be built. We are prepared, and I'm asking you to continue this meeting. We'll come with our plans, and you can make your decision then. And I will promise you this too. I'll remove from the table any cloud of doubt. I'm gonna go to Mr. Musetti and tell him that that was not warmly received by Mr. Ashmore and ask him to remove it.
I think if that were to happen, Ed, the other thing too is like, maybe one kind of graphically confusing thing on the site plan is that you do have this small section of road width and shoulder width here. I think you need to show that on the plan if an updated plan is to be submitted. I mean, because there seems like a disconnect between what we're seeing in plan relative to what we're seeing in section, and I think those need to be threaded together more.
Right.
I would say that if you're gonna get additional rights from Musetti, it should be the right to construct and maintain.
Construct to set the standards of section, whatever it is, 5.14.
Construct and maintain.
Yeah, along that.
We're writing it down.
Along that line, I think, what I'd say practically is, as you know, you have to come back every year, right, to be re-upped? And there's an analysis
3 years.
with Kim. Is it every 3 years?
Yeah.
I thought it was every year. So there's gonna be some give and take on that as time goes on, as conditions change or whatever. And I just don't want you to be, you're a land use attorney, I don't want you to feel like you're bound, that you can't comply with what she wants you to do because the damn easement's holding you up.
I appreciate that.
Mr. Chair, I do want to say one thing about technicalities, if I can,
Sure.
about submission of information and due process. It's been brought up several times by Mr. Pelagi and Mr. Manahan. I don't know if Mr. Cates get in on it too, but about the record and what's in the record, it drives me crazy. I remind everybody, I think I said this months or years ago, generally the applicant gets to submit a bunch of stuff, and then the opponents get to submit a bunch of stuff. But the board can always request technical changes to any application, especially minor ones. And the only way that you make that fair is that then the neighbors or the opponents get to comment on those changes. That does not mean, as I think Mr. Manahan and Mr. Cates want to do, that you go back and discuss everything and you bring in all kinds of stuff. That's not what that means. The leading case involves Mr. Bear, the town of Washington versus Lane, or Lane versus town of Washington, and there's a back and forth. And so I don't think it's been unfair to anybody. If you let Mr. Bear come in and change technical deficiencies that are obvious, such as the center line of the easement being here versus describing the outside of it, that's an obvious technical deficiency. The due process rights of the neighbors aren't affected. Mr. Pelagi can come back and he can comment on that easement specifically. So I just wanted to clarify that. I have no problem, if you want to do this, which I don't recommend, but if you do want to do this, I think it would be fine to ask the applicant to come back with a road plan and the other guys can comment on it.
When we need enough time to comment on it, unlike this time.
Yeah, we're gonna have lots of time.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. And I don't remember being bound by any submission standards, and I explained my rationale for why that letter was submitted the day that it was. I waited for Pelagi to submit something because I knew he would. The only time that we had submission requirements, as I recall, was when we had competing noise studies that were being done. Happy to abide by a rule if you prescribe it.
I think I would expect that those kind of submission standards would apply for every submission after we discuss those submission standards, just from the standpoint so everybody can review it in time. And thank you for the counsel, Jim. And legalese aside, I think there's also a human component here to this process that we're all invested in. And I would like to hear now from the board on how you guys feel about where we're at, what we're asking them for, and if you're up for them submitting the road compliance relative to 6B11 and continuing the hearing to a date certain or denying it. I mean, let's have some discussion here.
Take your thing off mute.
Yeah. Yeah. Press the space bar.
They don't want to talk to us.
No.
All right, Bill, I guess all I can say is I am somewhat inclined to just say, let's just, they've had plenty of opportunity to submit it, but I also don't want this to be all that gets kicked back to court, that we are not, we believe that we have grounds to be requiring this, but we've all recognized that there's some debate out there. So I don't want this whole application to be hinged on something that we had to vote on it. It wasn't so obvious that 6B11 applied that we didn't all vote on it. So I don't want this application hinged on that.
Christy?
Did you mute me over there? Okay. We have a little echo thing going in. Based on the discussion we just had, if there is an ability to change technical deficiencies, and what I'm hearing from Mr. Bearer is that this condition could be met. And, you know, we're not going to give a waiver if the condition can be met. And so I agree with Meredith, while that there might be an opportunity here to push the vote, this may not be the right time.
Dave?
Yeah, I definitely think
I
we
don't know
should
why you're still getting echo.
tell Meredith that,
Now mute.
there she goes. Yeah, I definitely think we should give them the opportunity to come back. I think there was some misunderstanding on their part, and I think we've clarified it now. So I definitely think, and I also asked, you know, what you wanted some input as far as where I think we stand on the whole thing, too, well, where everybody thinks we stand. And I, if they get what they need, then I think that they're gonna be okay on that portion. There are other portions of the ordinance that we voted on that I definitely want to revisit. So that's where I am.
Tracy, where are you?
I agree with the fact that I think we should allow the opportunity for an additional submission. I hope for your applicant's sake that Mr. Musetti agrees to do away with that language there. It's a real cloud, and I think that is your biggest stumbling block at this time.
James, and I agree too, I think you should be provided the opportunity to resubmit and show compliance. James, in terms of formulating a potential motion here, any guidance?
Move to request that the applicant submit a plan.
Resubmit? No.
Well, resubmit, submit, whichever one you want to use. And supporting documentation showing how the applicant will meet the
Hold on, hold
standards.
on.
Sorry,
Okay, submit a plan, submit a plan and supporting documentation showing.
how the applicant will meet
The standards?
the street design and construction standards
Hold on. Okay,
of section 5.14 of the subdivision ordinance.
okay,
I think there's a semicolon there. If not, a specific request from the applicant for a waiver
hold on. Okay,
of submission requirements per
yeah,
QLO section 4.2
okay,
or
yeah,
a specific request with reasoning
okay,
for a waiver
yeah,
of performance standards per QLO section 4.3.
okay. We good?
I think that's it. I think there's some other stuff, but I don't think it has to be in the motion. I mean, I'd like to see the thing with Musetti, more flexibility on that. I'd like to see the ordinance, the problem that Dan and Mr. Manahan brought up about, it's an inadequate description. It's to the center versus the outside. That needs to be fixed. I don't know, is there any other little technical things like that?
Mr. Bear brought up the cul-de-sac, basically, I think you said it was ridiculous or something, some adjective that described what you thought of it, so that needs to be addressed.
Well, if by address, I think you mean I need to make an argument as to why the performance standards we ought not be required to build it, or why.
Right.
That fits. I'm just bringing up, that's gonna be an issue that needs to be resolved.
I don't want to interject myself too much here, but I think in the past, the way things that actually happens is the applicant calls the code enforcement officer and they have a discussion about how that cul-de-sac is gonna look and why it goes there, and then it's more easy to understand on the plan. I don't know about the code enforcement officer, but I didn't understand why, I know it can be, but why it was on the applicant's lot. And then I guess there's this question about whether the other people then get access to it.
James, I can say historically what the board has reviewed and where there have been complications with cul-de-sac compliance is often the applicant will get the fire chief to chime in and say, hey, look, turning a truck around here just really isn't feasible, but if we do it over here, we can make it work. That kind of dialogue with the chief comes before the board.
And I'd also like them to call the code enforcement officer, make sure the technical specifications. Mr. Bear's done a number of these before, and Mr. Salisbury's a veteran. I don't want him to have to come back to the next meeting and say, well, you didn't show this technical thing. That'd be a waste of time.
That would be. So Heidi, we had a potential motion draft passed out there.
All right, read it back.
Please.
Request that the applicant either submit or resubmit, that was not decided, a plan and supporting documentation showing how the applicant will meet a street design and construction standards of section 5.14 of the subdivision ordinance. If not, a specific request from, subdivision ordinance, that's where the semicolon went. If not, a specific request from the applicant for a waiver of submission requirements per the QLO section 4.2 and/or a specific request with reasoning for a waiver of performance standards for QLO standard section 4.3.
All right. Any thoughts, any motions anybody wants to make?
So moved.
Anastasia, second.
Any further discussion? All right, all those in favor?
One
Go ahead.
discussion thing, the technicalities that were discussed that don't end up in the motion, what happens with those? The thing about the language in the easement needing to be adjusted, the cul-de-sac issue, I mean, is that just understood? It's not included in the motion, though.
That's Mr. Bear's risk. He's heard what we're looking for.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we don't, we aren't remiss in our specificity again. Okay, that's it.
We have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? None heard. We'll call the vote. All those in favor, Dave?
Aye.
Christie?
Anastasia, aye.
Meredith?
Randolph, I.
Tracy?
Tracy Keller, aye.
Myself, William Hanley, aye. James, one question about the previous motion and vote on 6B11 applying. Should we amend that to say why we thought it apply and relative to section 2.8 of the QLO?
I don't care.
If it would clarify the record, we probably should.
Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, anything we can do to make things clear.
Meredith, what do you think? Should we amend that motion?
Yeah, I worry that it could be a hot button issue in the future, and so I think that's a decent idea.
Christie? She's nodding her head. Yes.
Shaking my head. Yes, affirmative.
So I think
Findings of fact, is that what you're talking about?
yeah, we need to amend that motion about the acceptance of 6B11 applying. And James, if there's any wording guidance, but I think that the board finds that section 6B11 applies to
Maybe Heidi can read it over.
yeah, let's start with that. Thank you.
I've got to find it. All you have is section 6B11 applies.
That the board finds that section 6B applies based upon the understanding of section 2.8.
Hold on.
Section 2.8 conflicts with other ordinances. The QLO section 2.8 conflict other ordinances, stating that the application will be.
Is this verbatim from the
Yeah.
ordinance you're about to read?
Yes.
Okay.
Stating that it is anticipated that the application will be reviewed concurrently with this order.
Hold on.
It's essentially the second
Yeah, I
sentence.
just don't have it
Yeah.
on me to write down, and I know you're gonna want it again.
Yeah,
Anticipated that I'm sorry.
he's,
All right.
I just cut it off there, Mr. Chairman.
all right. So any motion to amend that motion?
I make that motion to amend that motion.
Thank you.
Anastasia, second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor, Meredith?
I think I just got kicked out.
Did I hear an affirmative? No?
I haven't heard it yet.
Okay.
Meredith?
Sorry, Meredith Randolph, aye.
Christie?
Anastasia, aye.
Dave?
Big Ashmore, aye.
Tracy?
Tracy Keller, aye.
Myself, William Hanley, aye.
Well, motion carries.
Motion carries.
So at a great risk here, I do want to bring up one thing that Mr. Barrett brought to our attention about the approval, many months ago of the road. And don't hate me for saying this, I mean, you have enough other reasons to hate me, but my understanding that when the road standards were reviewed, I don't know what anybody else did, but I remember distinctly that I said something like, hell, that thing has been there for a long time, I'm sure it's grandfathered. Now, I don't know if the board wants to relook at the road standards, now that we know that it's not grandfathered, that it has to be redone. Does the board want to relook at the road?
I think we have to have the submission better quantified for us to do that.
I think the theory at the time, my memory was, well, the thing's been there a long time, they're driving over it now.
And I'm not saying that
It's
we
good
need to go there,
Right.
but we would need more data to determine if we need to go
Maybe you need
there.
to go there. I just didn't know if there was anything about the paving at the start, or the apron, or if you wanted to do anything differently. Now that you know that you
I
have the
don't,
opportunity to bring it up to snuff.
I don't think we're there.
Okay.
Okay. Now we have to continue to a date certain, or,
Either way, I'm always in favor of a date
Yeah.
certain, but it never seems to happen.
Could I just ask a question?
sure.
Sorry to prolong this, but Mr. Ashmore just mentioned that he's interested in potentially reconsidering some other items, and I'm sure Mr. Collier talked about the road. But I'm just curious, given what Mr. Collier said about potentially limiting input from others unless the board asks for it, if there are any particular questions that you would like to focus on in terms of reopening, for example, reconsidering some issues like noise, for example, or the issues that Mr. Bergeron mentioned with respect to the application not being sufficient with respect to certain items. And because what I would request from the board is an opportunity prior to the next meeting to address some of those issues that we see as deficiencies that, and admittedly, we came late to the game, and I apologize for that, but that we have commented on, but that the board hasn't considered.
I mean, I would think, James, that we have a checklist on the table
Yeah,
that,
you were very thorough.
that we have been very thorough, I'd like to think, very diligent with, very accommodating, that we have drilled down through, and if we were to make it to a final vote and in reviewing and quantifying all those different sections we've had the findings of fact and conclusion law for, that would be the point where if the board felt that we needed to revisit something, then we would consider revisiting that.
Yeah, I mean, we've always, whenever this subject has come up, it's always been said that we could revisit any portion of what we've done. And the reason why I made that statement is I want to make sure that everybody understands that that's where we're operating.
And you'll understand that I disagree with
I
your
do.
ability to go
Yeah.
back 2
Yep.
years. You did that once, going back 2 years, if you remember, we did that once, and it ended a disaster.
The way I conceive of it, the revisiting anything, is if there's a burning desire based on something extraordinary. And a good example for me is this road thing. I think you might, I'm not saying you should, but I'm saying you might want to relook at it because through the diligence of your code enforcement officer, you discovered that it wasn't grandfathered. It wasn't a lawfully pre-existing non-conforming lot, and therefore 6P11 applied. That's substantial, and therefore I'll say it does, it might require a relook at roads, at the road. That's the, outstanding, extraordinary type of thing, which would make you, I think, go back and do a redo. Otherwise, I'm sorry to Mr. Manahan, but unless there's a damn good reason, then you just shouldn't redo. I mean, unless you want to spend another 10 years doing this.
I think, and I hope I speak for the board, but, we're all trying to work towards conclusion of this. And, and none of us, and correct me if I'm mistaken, want this to continue, any longer than it absolutely needs to. And that, however, we do have an obligation to the people of this town to be as diligent and in our review of the application. And so it's a balancing act, James. We are striving to dot all our i's and cross all the t's as best we can. However, it can't be an infinite loop of review either, So there we have it. I think we need to have motion on the table on how to continue this?
No.
No?
Sorry, I want you to be very clear so that the applicant, Mr. Manahan, Mr. Pelleggi, and Mr. Cates, as to what your standards for submission are. I want to go through that argument again. Unless you want to go through all that circus again?
So, can I read it a third time? Item number one of what we asked for last time is how exactly does the applicant?
No, not that, the
And-
timeline,
The timeline.
the timeline for
Oh,
submissions.
the
Mr.
timeline
Bear is
for
gonna do it, and then
submissions,
the
my
others
bad.
are gonna
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. The timeline for submissions, so I need guidance on that. So there.
I know
what is it?
Mr.
We-
Bear
we
submits
have-
everything, then the other guys criticize,
Right,
then
so
Mr.
it's,
Bear gets one brief rebuttal. Mr. Manahan does not get, nor Mr. Blakey, nor anybody else, another kick at the can. It's applicant, neighbors, brief rebuttal. No further kicks. And there's dates.
so we can't do that
Well, you
in,
have to have a date of a meeting
Yeah.
first, don't you?
Sure.
Okay, we're gonna have to do a doodle poll.
mhm. Then we do it,
Can't we just do that while we sit here? Can we look at our calendars and say?
Well, I don't know, I mean, the room capability, I don't have the calendar in this room
Okay.
accessible anymore. I can't answer that.
can we
The only
also,
way I could do is the doodle, because I don't know the
can we also, can we aim at a date through a doodle poll that's as sooner rather than later? You know, so we can, I think one of the most challenging things of this whole saga is just the time to travel between each hearing. And I would hope that, you know, we could get some momentum here and towards conclusion. And so I would hope that we can get everybody back here within a reasonable amount of time and just, you know, wrap this up. So,
Well, as you know.
so you're
the
gonna
doodle-
have, I know, and it's
the Doodle
complicated.
poll's been a pain in the ass.
It
because
really is,
I
yes.
can't get people to attend, it's just the dates don't work for everybody.
Yeah.
That's what the problem's been. It's not
It-
been because there hasn't been back-to-back dates.
And how much time do you think you need?
Yeah.
That's where we started, isn't it?
The 30 days, you know, 30 days.
Let's aim for 30 days from now.
Thanksgiving.
Perfect.
So that's for my submission, right, not to meet, because we're gonna have.
Okay.
And then if I remember correctly, I think it's submission and 14 days before the meeting, 7 days before the meeting for reply, and then your rebuttal, I think, is either 3 or 4 days. I think that's how it goes, something like that.
Are you referring back to the time when we adopted something?
Yeah,
So you're giving him 30 days and us 7, is that what you're saying?
yeah.
We would request more time than 7 days to review what's going to be submitted.
That's, we have to look back through the minutes, but we'll go by what the submission guidelines have been previously established as. And
I
it's,
think that's what you're gonna find, but that's it.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure that's it.
We need to have a consultant take it, he's got a consultant preparing it, we have to have a consultant look at it to make sure that it meets the requirements of the ordinance.
And I hear you, but historically, that's how we've been handling it, so.
Well. You have a question, Lieutenant?
I think we stick with what we.
I think we stick with what we have.
And I think the reason why we agreed to the 30 days is to give them a reasonable amount of time to try to negotiate the rights that they need to negotiate.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that's the biggest obstacle. The rest of it, we can meet the rest of it.
Yeah, in the past, when there's been something extremely complicated, before you were here, like, sound. Mr. Bear had God knows how long, and then I think Dan requested more time for his people, and we did do some of that back and forth. But here, you know, once he gets the easement straightened out with Musetti, it's gonna, when Steve can draw up a plan, it's not that hard to criticize a plan in a week. I don't know. I don't think it takes.
I think, if I could jump in just for a second, I think the last time Roger Cates here, we were given 14 days, quite sure, to respond to Mr. Bear's submission.
Fine with me.
I don't care, whatever you wanna do, as long as you get it set tonight.
Right.
So they have 30 days to submit, 14 days to,
No, the dates are, for my mind, are back from when the meeting is. See what I'm saying? I'm
Right,
trying to
so-
make sure that you're not jammed up at the end.
right,
So they get 30 days, then it's 14 to reply. If you want to do 14, then say 7 for Mr. Bear to rebut.
30, 14, 7.
Yeah, that's sometime before all bridge is over.
Christie, Meredith, what do you think? 30, 14, 7?
I mean, if we did that, then we wouldn't be coming back together in a month, correct?
No, January.
Yeah, because we're right up against the holidays there. I don't remember if it was 14 to reply or a week, if we're staying with what we've done historically.
Why aren't we just staying with what we have had
If
historically?
we've varied it
Yeah.
in the past, then there's a history there too.
Mhm.
The question is, as I said, with the noise, it was very complicated, and it was only fair to give more time because it was complicated.
Yeah,
Do you think that this can be done in 7 days, or do they?
I feel like this issue can be handled in 7 days. I don't
Sounds good to
feel
me.
like this has, despite the importance of this issue, the board has determined, I don't feel like it has the layers to the cake that the noise section had.
And we never looked at it the way Mr. Manahan described it, that the applicants gets all this
So-
lead time. The way we did it was we said, the meeting's gonna be this date, at least 14 days back, the applicant had to submit. Then the next, at least 7 days back, and at least 3.
I think we have a submittal period established historically, and we should stick to that. So, and I think wasn't it,
Well, there was one meeting that you had November 6th, which was on noise. And then there was a motion that the meeting be continued to November 20th, 2019, with a submission deadline of November 13th and a rebuttal by November 15th.
That's what I mean, 7,
That's 5
14,
days.
7.
You gave the rebuttal and you gave the applicant 7 days before the meeting date.
That one was a discrete issue on noise where there was just a tiny additional bit of evidence requested. That was a break from our normal schedule.
Shane, does that sound right to you, 14, 7, and 3?
I wish I could remember, James. It's close. It might have been 10, it might have been 7. I don't remember.
Does anybody do you have a procedure, a thing, rules of procedure?
No.
I can find it. I'll go back to,
Yeah.
I'm sorry that I don't have it tonight. I wasn't prepared that we were gonna be doing this. I will, if you don't mind, I'll go look.
let me see,
I
14,
would just
7.
point out that the applicant said a lot more, he should have supplied this at tonight's meeting. And you're giving the applicant a lot of dispensation here to have additional time. You're forgiving basically a failure to comply with your requirements at the meeting 6 months ago. I just,
That's not how we look at it. We look at it as, the board needs to get stuff ahead of time so it's not jammed up. So at least X number of days before the meeting, the applicant submits, then the neighbors submit, and the board rebuts. All of that's designed so the board has enough time. The stuff you're talking about, whether it's fair to give this guy 6 months and this guy a week.
My point is, Mr. Collier, that there's impacts on other people too, not just the applicant here, and the board obviously, but for the public, for members of the public. We're affected by this extension, this constant extension and dispensation for the applicant as well. That's my only point, right? I feel like that warrants a little bit of extra time on our part as well, since you've given the applicant so much extra time.
13, 30, 14, 7.
Yeah, what's the difference of another 7 days? I mean, it's just,
Meredith, what do you think? 30, 14, 7?
I think if the opponents have asked for more time, I actually think we should consider giving them more time. You know, we are talking a specific subject and they don't feel like that's enough time for their rebuttal. I think we should give them more time.
Christie, what do you think about 30, 14, 7?
If we could remember what we did in the past, I'd be more excited to standardize it. But since we can't, and it does make sense to do 30, 14, 7, I can live with that.
Tracy?
The 30, 14, 7 seems okay. I mean, how much more time would you ask for?
I think that's fine. I think that's fine. I don't want to be obstructionist. Just 7 days seems awfully quick to turn around a technical response for something like this.
Here's another one where you guys met. There was a meeting on July 17th with a submittal deadline date, July 3rd, 2019, 2 weeks prior to July 17, and deferring the issue of noise to a future date, and then July 10th, 2019 would be the deadline date for submissions of any opposing materials. So again, 7 for the opposition. And then 14 for them.
My memory sounded pretty good, eh?
Mhm. But we're saying 30, 14, 7.
Now that's 2
I don't
weeks.
care. Let's go home.
Yeah, 30, 14, 7. Anybody want to make a motion to that?
so.
Meredith Randolph, I make a motion to do 30, 14, 7.
Second that, Deb?
Anastasia, second.
Oh, Dave beat ya. Any further discussion? All those in favor, Meredith,
Randolph, I.
Dave,
Dave Ashmore, aye.
Christie,
Anastasia, I.
Tracy Keller,
myself, William Manley, aye.
So just to be clear, that the 30 days is from the date that the next meeting is. So Mr. Barrett still needs time to get his act together, you know, or are you saying that it's 30 days?
Why wouldn't it be 30 days from today?
All right,
Yeah.
so he gets 30 days and then the 14 is 14 after the 30 and then 7 after that. So traditionally, I'm just saying traditionally, the board has done it the opposite way.
Right,
They set a meeting date and then looked backwards on the
Okay.
submission
Yeah, because if
date.
you're not gonna be meeting again until January, right?
Mhm.
Isn't that what you just said?
it would have to be.
It would have to be based on that time frame.
so can we pick a date
Yeah, can we
to try
pick?
to, can we
No.
just pick one, and if it doesn't work, you send out a doodle poll?
Like January 23rd.
Yeah. The first Wednesday in January.
Make it one of our normal planning board meeting dates. And we know that that's open.
The first or third Wednesday in
We
January.
don't have to worry about,
The third's better timing for this.
Did you say first Wednesday,
Or
Wednesday
the,
in January? Does anybody got a calendar?
That's the 5th or the 19th.
What?
Wednesday?
First week of January is the 5th, second week is the 12th.
What do you want, 5th or 12th?
the 12th.
well, no, what's our normal
Yeah,
We normally meet,
I don't have a calendar.
No,
It's
we're-
Second Wednesday.
Don't-
Second Wednesday.
The
Yeah,
second
so-
Wednesday is the 19th.
right, so that makes it the 12th.
The 12th. The second Wednesday's 12th, so 12th.
And that should work, because, I mean, I don't know about everybody else that would normally participate in the doodle poll, but can everybody make that day? Either through in person or Zoom?
Mr. Chair, if I could speak for myself, I'm sorry, that's the one week I'm not around.
We've been accommodating.
Yeah,
really,
we're good.
The board, the applicant.
So let's aim at the 12th then.
He just said did he just say the 12th doesn't work for Mr. Cates?
Kate's will send an associate.
Okay.
He's gonna.
I had planned on a vacation that week, and if it could be accommodated, I'd appreciate it, but if it can't, I guess.
In the past, we've had associates attend the
Okay,
hearing.
just,
Yeah, he has the option of Zoom.
Yep,
Mr. Manahan said said,
yep.
what's his name, Frank down here one time. That's why they're big law firms.
If we do the doodle, we'll be into March.
Yeah, no, let's, the 12th.
And that leaves Mr. Bear roughly the 12th of December to get his stuff in, which gives you all kinds of time. I mean, God, you've got a month, 6 weeks, 7 weeks.
Doesn't give till December 12th.
You do 7 weeks to do your business. That's lots of time.
And can we also state that, I don't know what's gonna happen with COVID and all of that, but that we would that we wanna have Zoom available for that meeting?
You know, I think that we would continue as we have tonight and with the regular planning board meetings of having a Zoom option.
And the reason why I bring that up, the last time we did this, I was in Florida and I had to fly home.
Mhm.
And, you know, I've got comfortable with Zoom, and I'm gonna be in Florida, and I really don't wanna fly home just for this meeting.
Have you adopted one of those remote
Yeah.
participation policies?
yeah.
We have.
I just want to go on record to say that, just in case somebody thinks that should change.
So Bill, did you get a motion to a date certain?
Meredith,
Meredith Randolph, I make a motion to continue the meeting to a date certain of January 12th, 6 o'clock, 2022.
Anastasia, second.
any further discussion? Unheard. All right. All those in favor, Meredith,
Randolph, I.
Christie,
Anastasia, aye.
Dave,
Dave Ashmore, aye.
Tracy,
Tracy Keller, aye.
myself, William Hanley, aye. I think we did it. Yeah.
To adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
No, you don't.
No, we don't.
Oh, sorry, you don't adjourn,
No,
continue.
we just continued it.
Oh,
Held on.
oh,
20 years
That's
of
it.
doing this, try to screw you up.
No, you almost did.
So we
All
done?
right, so
We're done.
this meeting is done.
We don't have to make a motion to continue to.
Meredith just made a motion to continue to a date certain, so.
Go Red Sox.
With the law.
Huh? Really?